Are you queuing me in, Ellie? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on remote engagement, removing barriers to participation in the context of COVID-19. My name is Annette Holman, and I'm the Community and Learning Manager for the Healthy Aging Challenge Community of Practice, which is funded by UKRI and delivered by the Centre for Aging Better. Before we start this, I just want to run through the usual formalities of the session. So this is a webinar, so we're in presentation mode, and the participants will be muted throughout. The session's being recorded and live streamed on the Centre for Aging Better's YouTube channel, which we'll add a link to the chat for you, and that has audio captions. We'll also have the recording available for you afterwards. For that, we'll be using the Q&A function for questions for all our speakers today, so please do add your questions as we go. And you can find this in the bottom ribbon of your screen. You can also look to vote up questions of those that you want to ask the panelists. And we also have the chat button, so if you do want to have a conversation throughout the webinar, then please do. In fact, why not introduce yourself now? Say hi to other people on the webinar. Great, so that's just the bit of housekeeping. Today's session is going to flow as follows. I'm just going to provide some background to the Healthy Aging Challenge and the community of practice and of why we're here today. And we're then going to hear from Humanly, who supported us in this work and co-wrote the paper on remote engagement. After that, we'll hear directly from two of the community members about their experience of adapting their engagement approach. And then we'll open up to Q&A at the end. So we have actually 1 hour and 15 minutes allocated for this session, so plenty of time for those conversations. So we will finish by 12:15 today. Okay, great. So just to give you a bit of background to the Healthy Aging Challenge and the community of practice. So in 2017, UK Research and Innovation, known as UKRI, launched the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund with 98 million invested into the challenge on healthy aging in 2020. The Healthy Aging Challenge supports the government's Aging Society Grand Challenge mission for people to enjoy 5 more years of healthy, independent living by 2035, while narrowing the gap between the experience of the richest and the poorest. To achieve this challenge, the industry and researchers to develop and deliver products, services and business models that can be adopted at scale, which support people as they age. And this will allow people to remain active, productive, independent, and socially connected across generations for as long as possible. The Centre of Aging Better were commissioned by UKRI to develop the Healthy Aging Challenge framework, which helps stimulate ideas and provide thinking points for the challenge. And we were then successful in being commissioned to deliver the community of practice to support the Healthy Aging Challenge. Next slide, please. So just what is the community of practice and what are we trying to achieve? So it's a learning community that brings together organisations with an interest of developing solutions to support people to age well. It's a space for members to collaborate, to problem solve, to share experiences, learnings and insights through activities including workshops, conferences, webinars like today, and an online resource library that we have. And we'll be adding the Community of Practice website onto the chat as well, so you can have a look yourself. So today's webinar is actually an example of sharing those insights with the wider community interested in healthy aging, so we can engage as many people as possible on this subject. And why remote engagement? So the next slide, please. So today we're looking at user remote engagement. So when we think of user engagement, we want to ensure people who will be using a service or product are involved in the shaping, design, delivery of that. And typically we imagine people, groups of people sat in a table together, sharing experiences and options. The Post-its are out, the Sharpies and the flip charts, and the all-important tea and biscuits are usually there. And now we all know in the past year that's something that hasn't been possible. Yet the needs of users to be involved in product and service design remains as crucial as ever. And this is identified as something that we really needed to look at throughout the community of practice. So working with Humanly, we brought together some of the trailblazer projects from the community to look at the barriers to traditional face-to-face user engagement caused by COVID-19 and how we could overcome them. By sharing experiences and considering user perspectives and comparing approaches, we identified a number of ways to do this, and they are published in our new thematic paper, Remote Engagement, Removing Barriers to Inclusion in the Context of COVID-19. And again, the link to that paper will be added to the chat, so you can have a read of that after the webinar. Now, to talk to through the approach and findings, I'm now pleased to introduce to you Jenny Parker and Zoe Rowe, both from Humanly, who are now going to share their experience of supporting this shift and the recommendations that emerged. Over to you, Jenny and Zoe.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny and I'm the founder and director of Humanly. Humanly is an award-winning design studio focused on social impact. Next slide, please. And at Humanly, we work with a wide range of organisations that share our commitment to social impact. So usually we work with charities, we work with central and local government, we even work with international NGOs and UN agencies. So our work is quite global. We've tackled all sorts of topics such as mental health, ageing, cancer, and many more. Next slide, please. In all our projects, we apply our human-centered design process, which starts with problems, and then we go through a creative problem-solving process that keeps people at the heart the whole way through. So at the research stage, it's all about building empathy and kind of understanding people's experiences to generate insights and opportunity areas. And then we move into co-creation, which involves coming up with ideas with all stakeholders in a collaborative process and refining those ideas into design concepts. And then lastly, we take our ideas into prototyping to try and test ideas quickly and cheaply to see what works in practice before we get to a solution that we feel is confident and will work. Now, normally this involves a lot of face-to-face engagement with people. Over the past year, we've had to do all of this remotely. So we have a lot of learning to share, which we're happy to do so today. Next slide, please. When it comes to user engagement, there are a lot of different terms that people use when talking about this in the context of developing a product or service. A commonly used term is co-production. However, we wanted to start by just explaining what this is and kind of alternative approaches that are a little bit different. So in terms of co-production, there is no one kind of agreed definition of co-production. However, definitions tend to agree that it's all about creating an equal partnership where the people who'll be using a service or product are not just involved in coming up with ideas, but also actually making decisions. So it represents a relationship with equal decision-making power during the design phase and the delivery. Co-creation, also known as co-design, involves the people who use services working with professionals to design, create and deliver services. So that's a little bit different from co-production, as the people who use services kind of work with professionals as opposed to taking over some of that work done by practitioners. And the goal is to co-create value by getting input from users from beginning to end and involving all other stakeholders as well. So not just users, but also service providers, commissioners, experts, developers, and so on. And finally, consultation is another common approach, and consultation gives service users or citizens the opportunity to input into the development process, usually by providing feedback, experiences or ideas at particular points in the development process. So that's often in response to a proposed change or kind of an improvement of a service. And the involvement is usually limited to specific elements of the design or development work, and decisions and delivery are then usually made by professionals. So next slide, please. whatever kind of approach you're taking to user engagement, be it co-production, co-design or consultation, it always involves working with people from lots of different walks of life, and some of those people might have access to technology and some of them might not. So there's lots of different things to take into consideration when planning engagement remotely. And I'm now going to hand over to Zoe, who's going to talk through the 7 themes outlined in the paper to think about whilst planning remote engagement.
Thanks, Jenny. So my name's Zoe. I'm a social innovation consultant at Humanly, who also co-wrote this paper. So the first of the 7 themes that I'm going to talk through is the breaking down the barriers to digital engagement. So if we just pop forward a slide. Brilliant, thank you. So this is really about, the thinking about offering one-to-one training to participants in advance to calls. This really gives people a safe space to practice. So we've successfully done this before in a project and found it worked really well. We were able to give one-to-one support ahead of a call that allowed people to kind of play around with technology, for example, with Miro, and then we allowed them to kind of have time to play around with Miro so they felt more comfortable before the team call. We then would say allow some additional time. So for example, give maybe 20 to 30 minutes prior to a workshop. Just let people get used to the technology, settle in before you get going. Then ensuring one-to-one support is provided during the session. So this could be providing a phone number at the beginning of a workshop in case people get kicked off. We've all been there. Maybe they get lost. They'll always have a number to come to. And then if we go on to the next slide, we have consider alternative methods to user engagement activities. So there's many ways to carry out user engagement activities at every stage of your project. Aside from your kind of one-to-one team calls or your group calls, think about how you might be able to use postal kits, for example. This is what is shown on the screen right now. We've sent out paper activities for people to capture their experiences and also diary logs as well in their own time. So a case study that's shown on the screen is some work we did with Guys and St Thomas's charity. And the aim of this was to understand people's attitudes and behaviours around breastfeeding and infant weaning, as well as kind of their priorities in life and also the context of their lives as well. So we sent out these postal kits for people to do in their own time, from home, and yeah, it was really, really successful. So the examples on the right-hand side we're showing are social network mapping to understand who are around people, who do they feel closest to or furthest away from. And then the bottom right-hand corner is card sorting, which allowed people to kind of move cards around to identify what things are most important in their life or least important in their life. So card sorting is an example of something that doesn't need to be done just physically. It could be done in an interactive environment like Google Slides or a digital whiteboard such as Mural or Miro. And then other things that could be done is capturing someone's journey through a service, which could be done over the phone, and then you could actually map that out onto a spreadsheet or a digital whiteboard. So feedback on ideas, which might be done face-to-face traditionally, could actually be done through an online survey. You could use conceptual sketches, storyboards, videos. So examples that we've used is Google Forms and being able to kind of upload videos or storyboards or sketches and then ask some questions which don't need to be closed. They could be open to get really rich feedback on these ideas. So if we scoot forward another slide, we go on to identifying and breaking down barriers in participants' living environments and other commitments. It's really important to consider the person's living environment and any barriers that they might be facing. So think about the best time of day that people can best engage with the activities that you might be asking them to do, especially if they've got caring responsibilities. So some people might be more comfortable with their cameras off, for example, in group calls, or they might prefer to dial in as well. And think about the rapport that you're creating with people, which when done remotely might be a little bit harder than when you're doing it face to face. So it might be worth factoring that into your planning, maybe taking more time to build relationships before a session. And then the next slide, we have adapting your delivery to make it as accessible as possible for participants. So think about when you might need to adapt the language and the literacy in your remote engagement plans, where people have needed additional communication needs. Keeping language really simple and using tools such as picture cards could work really, really well. The example that we have on the left-hand side of the screen is where we sent participants with learning disabilities disposable cameras, as well as really clear instruction sheets that had pictures and text of what to do. So the cameras were also color-coded based on the activity described on the instruction sheet. So this allowed people to capture their own experiences, but in a way that suited them, that was really, really clear. And for longer engagement pieces, letting the participant complete these in their own time allows for more kind of individual reflection and could help mitigate any pressures of them having to provide an instant answer with somebody looking at them, which we found quite effective. We did this in the infant feeding project that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, where people completed a diary study using their mobile phones. And a more recent example on the right-hand side is for the Manchester case study that's mentioned in the paper, where we sent dictaphones to participants where they could audio record their life story in their own time, talking, pressing pause, coming back to it, which was a really, really interesting option that we'd provided. So also, if you're running sessions online, consider doing these shorter than you usually would. It really helps people to stay focused. I mean, I'm not the only one here that's probably had Zoom fatigue over the last year. So really consider your timings, allow people to join in around their other life commitments as well. So on to the next slide, we have weigh up whether group or one-to-one engagement is most suitable. So it's really important to consider this, and one-to-one activities really have the benefit of ensuring that you hear from each individual's voice and opinions. But of course, group environments are really good at encouraging conversation and helping to spark ideas that are prompted from people kind of talking to each other and broadening on their thinking. So group conversations and creative activities can be facilitated via Facebook, WhatsApp groups, online forum discussions, or even group video calls. Really enables a group dynamic where participants are able to kind of build on one another's responses, as well as offering participants the opportunity to share and hear from other people with similar experiences to themselves. And then next slide, we have use partner organizations to amplify voice and reach more people. So of course, it's really a lot harder to reach people during lockdown. It's more difficult to recruit. People have got other things going on. So really take that into consideration. It might be that, you need to engage different organizations that already have a network of people that already have built a level of trust as well with people. So normally we would drop into existing groups, but what we've done in recent projects is utilizing local organizations to help get people involved. We've also used social media and worked with community groups or member organizations, business networks, and these can be used to recruit participants or also to maybe get engagement into group discussions as well. So on the next slide, the final one of the themes that I'm going to talk through is to consider setting a short and simple task ahead of time. So you've seen our examples from the previous slides of giving tasks for people to complete beforehand, for example, before having an interview call with them. And this can really help to focus the engagement and make interactions more productive. It's a really good way of helping participants reflect on their journey, for example, before having just a short period of time to then talk about that. And other things could be to set a task before a meeting, for example, or you could think about getting people to think about a question before a meeting. So really simple things you could do. And ultimately, it means that people are more likely to understand the purpose of the activity and what you're hoping to achieve from the session. And then finally, the final next slide that we have is a summary of kind of looking forward, what we can learn from the pandemic. And, you know, I think we're all in sometimes a state of negative thinking around the pandemic, but there have been some really positive learnings that we certainly will take on and carry on doing. And the first one here, we have just interacting differently. So through these postal kits and the digital diaries that we've been doing, it's really allowed for a more open and relaxed conversation in some cases. Always remember that the instructions need to be clear, ideally with illustrations, but ultimately combining this with phone calls has helped ensure that participants really fully understand what they do and gather some really rich insights as well. The second point we have here is creating hands-on activities that people can complete in their own time really encourages more creativity with people's responses. They've got more time to fill it out, they don't feel pressured, and we found that people kind of go wild with how much they want to tell us and put into some of these activities. The third one we have is the fact that digital diaries has been really effective, enabling longer engagement and observation periods. So rather than this taking place within a couple of hours in traditional face-to-face methods, we've able to do this over weeks, and it could be over months if you wanted it to be. Then fourth, we have undertaking engagement with the same group over a sustained period of time. So ideally in smaller groups, helps develop a sense of community and allowing people to increasingly open up as time goes on. So then, you know, if you would only to have one session or one point in time, they might feel a little bit closed or embarrassed, and then feeling a lot more comfortable when they get to engage over long periods of time. The fifth one we have here is to check participants' preferences rather than just making assumptions on their situations, especially around digital engagement. So some people are really comfortable, some people not so, but they might not be so comfortable to speak up and tell you that. So in the long run, it will really enable you to have more meaningful and ongoing engagement. And lastly, here we have investing in digital skills training support over a sustained period can have a huge payoff, both in terms of in the short term and long term for the project and also for the participants. So as we were saying, you know, having some support that's there in the live sessions, before sessions start, if you're using new tools that people might not be so familiar with. So that is a brief overview of the paper from us here at Humanly. But if you want to see the details of the case studies that we've mentioned in these slides, please do read the full paper. It is a great read. I know I'm biased, but as mentioned before, the link is in the chat box for you to find. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Zoe, for sharing that great presentation around the work that's done to date. We really hope that's given you some food for thought, provide you with some real practical actions that you can take. Now do remember to add any questions to the Q&A function. Jenny and Zoe will join us for the Q&A at the end. So anything regarding that presentation, then do start adding those questions. Right, moving on to the next stage. We're now going to hear from two of the Healthy Aging Challenge Trailblazer projects who are featured in the paper, about their experiences of adapting to test new ways of engagement. So the Trailblazer projects, they're the largest element of the Healthy Aging Challenge and funded to stimulate new ideas from a wide range of businesses, social enterprises, and to develop and deliver products, services, and business models at a large scale to support people as they age. So I'm pleased to introduce Ryan McDonald from Blackwood Home Neighbourhood for Independent Living, Paul Bliffin from Business Health Matters, and they're joined by Veronica Hawkins, the project manager for the Healthy Aging Challenge Community of Practice, based at the Centre for Aging Better, who will chair the conversation. Over to you, Veronica.
Thanks, Annette. So yeah, we're delighted that today we're joined by the two representatives from the Trailblazer project who contributed to the paper that we co-wrote with Humanly to share with us firsthand their experiences of undertaking user engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic. So welcome to Ryan McDonald from Blackwood Neighbourhood for Independent Living and Paul Bliffin from Business Health Matters. Thank you both for joining us today. So can I begin with asking you both to briefly introduce your project and explain the product or service users that you needed to engage with during this period? And then maybe you could also tell us a little bit how you had to alter your plans as a result of COVID-19. So I'll come to you first, please, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Veronica. I think for us that our Blackwood Neighbourhoods for Independent Living project really builds on our existing award-winning work around developing our Blackwood House and our Clever Clogs digital care and support system. The project itself focuses around 3 demonstrator neighbourhoods, which are co-designed by local people within those areas. So people that live or work within that area and really know the fabric of the area itself. Each of those neighbourhoods will have a range of innovative products and services that combine to create a supportive, sustainable, economically active and healthy place, which we're really excited about. In terms of the people that were most important for us to speak to, I think the fact that co-design is so important for us within the process. It was the local people, and we needed to make sure that we worked with them to identify the issues and the barriers to healthy ageing, but they also were right at the heart of sourcing those solutions and helping us to explore those solutions as we went along. And of course, looking at the COVID-19 side of that, Zoe's presentation there kind of hit the nail on the head for us as well, that a lot of our work would have been planned to be face-to-face in the heart of the neighbourhoods, in the heart of the communities, seeing face-to-face with people, the barriers that they're coming up against. But COVID-19 just meant that wasn't possible. So we worked really closely. We were incredibly lucky to have Professor Stephen Osborne from the University of Edinburgh as one of our project partners. So we worked really closely with Professor Osborne to adapt our planned sessions to then make them suitable for remote engagement, which was fantastic and really allowed us to move pretty quickly. But it's probably an important point to say that as well as the remote engagement, we also offered the one-to-one sessions with people as well, just if there was people within the group that we felt the digital steps were a bit too far removed for them to tackle.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Paul, can I ask you to introduce your project and tell us a little bit about the people that you've been working with during this period?
Sure, no problem at all. So our project is called Business Health Matters. It's a fairly large partnership project. We've got 15 partners, many of which are leisure service providers, so gym and fitness centres. And we work with the University of Central Lancashire Mind to design a health screening tool and a training package that goes with that. So we can then look at a workplace health screening. So the idea being that we train up gym and fitness staff to then go into workplaces, deliver health screening to over 50s in the workplace, looking for that early identification of health conditions, and then help them produce a wellbeing plan and support them into interventions which could be around physical or mental health, or even much wider than that, into anything that might combat social isolation, anything like that. So that's our project. Our key audiences from that were obviously trying to talk to businesses, both the key decision makers and the employees, and equally to talk to the leisure service providers that will be delivering the service. I think when we put in the application, our initial thought was we would have lots of group sessions, some Ryan's thoughts, face-to-face approach. When we tried to change things to account for COVID, initially our first thought was, great, we can just move all the groups into Teams or Zoom call. Some of that worked to a certain degree, but we quickly learned that given everything that businesses were dealing with, it probably wasn't quite the right approach. So we had to quickly adapt and learn, and we moved to much more one-to-one, whether that was through Teams or phone calls, which turned out to be a much better approach. And we were doing things at times that worked for the businesses just because of everything that they were dealing with at that time. We needed to really make sure it was all working around them rather than us trying to get them to come to events. So we found that once we changed that one-to-one approach, it was much more successful for us in terms of the depth of the discussion and the insight that we got back from businesses.
Right, thanks, Paul. So I think drawing on some of the recommended approaches in the report and some of the themes that Zoe and Jenny have talked about, obviously one of the big ones that a lot of us do tend to focus on around this work at the moment is digital engagement. And I know that when we spoke, when I interviewed you for the report, Ryan, Blackwood really did go above and beyond in terms of kind of both longer term investment, but work that you did to help to overcome digital barriers for your participants. So can I get you just to talk us through a bit of the activity that Blackwood have undertaken in that way?
Yeah, of course. We were really fortunate in that we've got 3 dedicated digital skills coaches at Blackwood already, that were working across the country with our housing and care customers before the pandemic. So it meant that when we made that decision to make the transition to remote engagement, we had the infrastructure and the skills in place to offer training, equipment, connectivity, really anything we could do to remove the barriers for participation to anyone that wanted to take part. And I guess for some of those, that meant a 10-15 minute conversation over the phone just to familiarise themselves with using Teams, how to get themselves on and off mute, etc., just to give them a little bit of confidence, I guess. But for others, that meant going right back to basics and everything from how to charge a device, how to connect to the internet, how to set up email accounts. A real investment in time, and sometimes over 3, 4, 5 different sessions to get them up to that speed. But I guess the big thing for us was that it wasn't a one-off event, because that we were putting together groups that we wanted to be part of this project long term. We saw it as an investment and thought we realised how crucial that first engagement was, that first session that people go along to, and would really be make or break to whether they would adopt the technology or not. So so that made a big difference. But as well as the digital skills coaches, we've done a few of the tips that Zoe had touched on as well. So we opened each of the meeting spaces 15 minutes before the session, just to allow people to come in and get comfortable, iron out any technical issues that were there. And I think just there's not many people that turn up to any meeting and face to face on the minute that it starts, and don't feel anxious about getting there, about whether the lift's going to work or whatever. So we wanted to really replicate that on the sessions for people as well. And it meant that we could identify before the session started if there were any technical issues. And again, we had a dedicated facilitator, part of the facilitation team, who was purely there to troubleshoot technical issues. So they had their telephone number was on the mural, as Zoe had suggested, and they had the contact details of everyone on the meeting as well, so that if someone did drop off, or if they couldn't get themselves off mute, we could deal with that behind the scenes without having to, I guess, cause any anxieties within the group itself. So yeah, I think we were in a really fortunate position, starting off with that base of the digital skills coaches, who are absolutely worth their weight in gold.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, because I suppose whilst every organisation might not have that resource, actually just some of that practical stuff is stuff that anybody could do. And am I right in thinking that you would make sure, obviously you had those dedicated people with that phone number, would that number be circulated in advance in case anybody was having problems as well on the day?
That's absolutely right. So the teams, because one of the things we found that confused people most and was the trickiest thing was actually the Teams invite. So when the Teams invite went out to people, we would also send an email accompanying that just with the telephone number of whoever they needed to contact for that day. So whichever digital skills coach was on, they would be available 20 minutes before to start walking people in. And most of the time, after the first 2 or 3 sessions, people really had it, were able to do it independently, but there was always those those issues that crop up, as they do for all of us who use the technology on a daily basis. So as I say, really worthwhile. And I think even just for peace of mind for people joining, knowing that the worst case scenario is a phone call to Carol or a phone call to David, rather than the worst case being stuck there frozen and not being able to participate.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Some really helpful tips there, I think. And Paul, just kind of coming over to you, whilst I think perhaps you didn't have the same challenges with your product and service users in terms of digital competence and literacy, both the groups you were working with, business owners and then leisure centre professionals, were obviously facing a lot of challenges in the external context that they were operating with at this time. But kind of despite that, you still managed a really good level of engagement by being led by their needs and their availability. I know you touched on some of this a little bit earlier in terms of kind of how you adapted some of your sessions, but can I ask you just tell us a little bit more about how you were really flexible to their needs and working to what they could do?
Yeah, so I think you naturally you make these assumptions, don't you, that people have we've got a particular focus on SMEs, and that people are running their own businesses, and that they'll be very comfortable. As Ryan said, they're actually dropping into a Zoom call with 10 people as part of a focus group that you've never met is actually quite a big thing for people, particularly when they've got lots of other pressures and lots of other considerations going on in their life. So we quickly found that we needed to make those changes to we got some information. Generally, the focus groups that were most productive for us had quite a small number in them, so sort of 3 or 4 people. The larger ones we tended, as you can do with face-to-face, would be dominated by 1 or 2 people that were particularly confident. So we decided the best way to get the information for us was to move to that one-to-one approach. Some of it, Zoe touched on Zoom fatigue earlier. We did have people that said we introduced phone calls because some people just said, look, I've spent all day doing business phone calls related to our work. Just having a phone conversation works a lot better for me. There's a lot more relaxed and almost helped us draw out more information from them. We changed so that we were doing them at times. We did, some kind of pre-9 o'clock so that people were talking to us before the work day, and some at the end of the work day. So in the evening when those people that were happy, and then similarly, there were quite a few that were around that lunchtime period so that people were fitting them in around that work day and were, good enough to give up their time to help us with that consultation. So it was really just about trying to flip it and put ourselves in that, given all the considerations at the present time, really put ourselves in the place of those people we wanted to speak to and what was going to make things simplest and easiest for them to engage and help us get that information and insight that we were looking for as part of our consultation.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. And I think kind of one lesson we can all really draw very strongly from the paper is that we know that flexibility and responding to the user needs really is key to keeping people engaged, especially when they are juggling all the challenges that kind of have been going on over the last year, and also when they're trying something for the first time. Are there any reflections that you have on any other changes that either of you made to your original plans that you think made a big difference in terms of kind of getting people to engage? Brian?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for us is that we used an interactive tool called Mural. For anyone who's not used Mural before, it pretty much replicates what we would do traditionally at a workshop with flip chart paper, highlighter pens, and colourful kind of post-it notes, and allows us to do it online. And we thought that was going to be a really good tool to keep things creative and to keep things engaging. But as we went through the training and the preparation for the sessions, we realised people were working so hard to get onto the Teams call in the first place, to then ask them to jump off and learn something new and work their way back to the Teams call again. We just felt as if it would be really unfair. So even before the session started, we had adapted that and decided that we were going to have a dedicated staff member who would share their screen and essentially do all the work for the participants. So they would share their screen. They would populate the mural board on behalf of the group, and we would still have that kind of creativity. We would still have that kind of engaging activity to go through. But again, we then realised that by sharing the screen, we really took away a lot of that, the social aspect of the online sessions. And it was strange because up until then, I felt like Teams and Zoom was taking away the social aspect from being face-to-face, but it just showed how much that people still value that active listening across Teams, across Zoom, seeing people's reactions when you speak. And I think, especially for our neighbourhood groups, seeing the rest of the group nodding when we're talking about things like managing common complaints of ageing, that can be a really vulnerable place to be, and getting that positive reinforcement from the gallery view was something that was really vital. So when we got that feedback from the group, we immediately kind of responded, and we shared the mural for 30 seconds, a minute at the start of the session to show people what we would be working on behind the scenes. And then the staff member would work on it behind the scenes. We would be in the gallery view, and at the end of the session, we would share the screen just for that recap on the mural to show them what we got, and just to do that sense check that we'd kind of caught the right thing. So it was great we could still use the tool, but it certainly we couldn't have used it in the way that it's intended to be used, and still have that, I guess, good bond within the group, and people feel comfortable and confident to contribute.
Thanks, Ryan, because I know kind of as part of the work you were doing, you were bringing people back together kind of over a sustained period, weren't you? So I guess that it obviously paid off to be able to do that they would come back because you were responding rather than overwhelming them and they didn't want to come back the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think exactly as Zoe was touching on, how important it is to get that, I guess, like to get that bond between people when we're meeting online. It was actually really refreshing for people to say that they wanted to see each other, because one of the concerns for us at the start was, will people be feeling really uncomfortable by allowing people to see right into the living room or wherever they are in the house? And actually it was the opposite, that they really valued that, being able to see each other and create those bonds going forward.
Right, thanks, Ryan. And Paul, did you have any other kind of reflections about any changes you made that you wanted to share?
I think for us, one of the keys was just offering that alternative. Obviously, we are talking about digital engagement today, but I think offering that option of a phone call as well really works as well for people. So I think where you can have that opportunity to offer a bit of choice and whatever platform works for people, so that they, you know, if they're sick of, if they've had a day of sitting in Teams meetings, they've had enough of it and they just want to have a quick phone call with you about it, that, you know, offer them that option. So I think for us that really worked well once we threw that assumption out the way that you know, putting everybody on a Teams call or a Zoom call was going to work best for them.
Great, thanks, Paul. And I think you've kind of maybe touched on this a little bit actually, Ryan, already, but I think we know that one of the biggest challenges when running any kind of meeting or session virtually is around building that rapport, especially when you kind of maybe bringing together people that don't know each other, that haven't met before, and there's that degree of trust that's needed. And also there's that challenge around making sure that you're keeping participants focused on the task at hand, and that they're prepared for what they're coming into. So it'd be good to just hear from you both a bit about how you did that. So I don't know, Ryan, if you want to start off and telling us a bit about how you kind of structured your program of sessions with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I guess one of the big things, again, Zoe has set us up really nicely with our presentation before us, because we put an awful lot of emphasis on the icebreakers and the getting to know you sections, because like I touched on earlier, it's not a one-off event. We were looking at building mini communities within communities to really support us with the project. So an awful lot of the people coming to our groups had led totally different lives. So on paper, maybe didn't have that much in common. So we used the icebreakers and we used activities to really hone in on that one thing we knew they all had in common, which was a passion for their neighbourhood, for their community, the reason that they came along to the sessions in the first place. And that made a big difference when we were asking them to focus and share with the group about their pride for their place, about the love of their home, of their area. It helped to break down some of those barriers and see that they had an awful lot in common, which was good. And they ended up fun activities in the way through as well, which was really good. The keeping focused and keeping I guess like keeping the focus on the task at hand, that was probably harder. I would say the groups would say it was harder for us to do than it was for them, because they were really well behaved with that. But because we had the kind of the 5 themes flying around in our head, it was always like it was always really exciting and really exciting conversations. But the way we tackled that was just by making sure that the 5 themes that we are covering within the project, each session was based on a different theme, and that it really helped during the sessions, but actually it helped an awful lot in advance of the sessions as well. So an example, if we were covering the design for age-friendly homes theme, then in the week in the lead up to that, we'd be asking people to have a look around their homes, see what's suitable, what's not suitable, do a stress test and think, in 10 years' time, is this still going to be the house for me, or would I need adaptations? Is the house suitable for adaptations? Have I got plans in place for that? And it really meant that when we were joining into the group that week later, everyone had been thinking about it for the week before, and the topic of conversation stuck as much as possible to that focus, which worked really well.
Right, thanks, Ryan. And I know, Paul, I know that you also undertook some kind of, you set some pre-work for some of the leisure centre professionals participating, didn't you? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, we with our leisure service professionals, we set them a little bit of homework or whatever you want to call it. We gave them, kept it fairly simple and brief, but we did so that they were coming into the session with a clear idea of what they were going to be talking about. We gave them a blurb about specifically what we were looking to discuss, and asked them there were kind of 3 bullet point questions that we asked them to focus on and come ready with that information. So we found that when we did that, once they came into the session, that they were prepared, they were ready to go. We didn't have many of those kind of awkward silences when other people were waiting for someone else to go first, or they were all really willing to contribute and to offer their views on it. So just giving them those little few tasks to prepare them for the session helped us get much more participation, and that it was easier to get that information from them, as I say, rather than we did them in focus groups. We got good attendance with the leisure providers, but it meant we didn't have that slight awkwardness when everybody's waiting for someone else to go and they were all ready to contribute.
Great, thank you. I can see we're getting lots of questions coming in. So in a minute, I am going to invite Zoe and Jenny back and open up some questions from the audience. But I guess I just wanted to finish out my conversation with you two specifically by asking you both to share the biggest or maybe the most surprising lesson that you've learned in the process of doing this work, and your top tip for anyone else planning remote co-production activities. Ryan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think the most surprising thing for me was just how eager our participants were to go over the digital challenge and get themselves online and take part. I think we were a little bit concerned in the lead up to that, but I think the way everybody really approached that and was driven to, and I think obviously COVID would have made an impact, because people see that the way things are just now, being able to have the digital skills means they can communicate with family, they can order their shopping online, see their GP. So there was probably a lot of added value attached to being part of those sessions as opposed to just turning up for our workshops. But that was definitely the biggest thing for me, is seeing the strides that people took. I was absolutely in awe of how they adapted and how excited some of them were about ordering a new webcam so they could be seen more clearly on the screen. It was brilliant, like, absolutely fantastic. And I think my top tip would absolutely be to put in those hours beforehand. That investment on just confidence building, on training if it's possible, but just to allow people to familiarise themselves with the technology and the tools that they're going to need during it before coming on to the session, because I think that first experience is so vital. So if you're able to put that time in before and just make sure people feel that little bit more confident and comfortable coming into the session. I think it's time consuming and definitely resource intensive at times, but it's an investment. I think that's the best way to look at it.
Great, thank you, Brian. Paul?
I think the biggest learning for us was that being willing to learn and change and adapt, and just to look at it, to have that quick evaluation of right, what's working, what's not, and to adapt and to be willing to make that change. Digital works in some aspects for some people, but you have to look at certain ways to change things for people, and just being willing to make those adaptations and change. I think linked to that, obviously, our top tip would probably be to put yourself in your audience or the groups that you want to get, speak to or consult with, to put yourself in their shoes and think about what's going to be the simplest and most effective way for them. I think we quite often we'll think, oh, this is the information we want to get, this works best for us, this is how we're going to do it, but try and put it in the way that it's what's going to work easiest for your participants, what are going to be the best times, what are the best methods, how, and I particularly echo what was said earlier about the short timings. I think that really works better in our experience, to try and have short, sharp bursts of things rather than having people in extended periods. But yeah, I definitely think it's trying to empathize with the people that you want to take part, and to consider their lives as part of your consultation, how it works, adapted to that.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. And thank you for sharing your insights and experiences, not only today, but also for taking the time to be interviewed as part of the work on the paper. I know I found it really insightful and valuable, and I'm sure that a lot of our guests today have got questions for you both after what they've heard so far. So I'd like to welcome back Jenny and Zoe from Humanly, and we're going to open up the Q&A questions now. So we've already got quite a few questions coming in, but please do feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A box. We'll get through as many as we can. I can just see that from a few of the first questions coming in are just following up on things that people have heard. So I'm just going to ask a few of those specific questions first. The first question, Jenny and Zoe, we've had a question about whether you found that you got a good response from the postal activities, and whether you set a time frame for returning answers and information. So I don't know if you want to add anything or tell us about that.
Yeah, so we found these really, really effective. And just starting on the first part of the question, so the effectiveness of the postal kits, I think also bearing in mind that we kind of not over-designed them, but we designed them in a way that were very engaging and creative. So they weren't like a Word document for people just to fill in. They were designed in a way that people could scribble on them. You know, there was diagrams for people to write on. We had cards for people to use. So yes, we did find them really, really effective. We also adapted them for different projects. I think that's really important to note that. So for example, the infant feeding project, we used card sorting with physical cards. And then when in the Manchester project with people aged over 50, we didn't use cards that could be a little bit more kind of cumbersome. And we used more like writing down lists, for example, but they were still engaging and creative. We actually guided people to complete approximately 3, and most people got really overly excited and completed loads. So we see that's a good testimony of how well they were received. In terms of the timings, so we obviously had our own project timeline, and we would post them out and then ask them to let us know when they received it. We had a kickoff call, what we called a kickoff call, to go through the pack, go through the instructions, make sure they understood everything. Then we would give them a guide of approximately, take about 2 weeks to complete X amount of activities. And then we penciled in a date to have what we call a debrief call, but it was just a kind of follow up to go through the activities once we've had time to digest them as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Ryan, there's a couple of follow-up questions for you specifically as well. So first, on a quite a practical point, how are you able to ensure, have you got any tips on how to ensure permission for sharing telephone numbers between participants and activity providers so that pre-project consultation and support could take place for members, non-digital community members? That's the first question. And then the second question, which I think I know the answer to, but it'd be good to expand on a bit. Did you find that the people that you were working with were already using digital and were active on the internet much, or was there much resistance from people to using digital, and how you overcame that?
Yeah, so if I go for the second question first, I think most of the people were using digital technology to some extent. So I think again most of them had devices. I think almost all had devices that they could use for it. Some needed a little tweak, as I say, like some people needed webcams to be able to take part. Some people preferred to take part without using the camera settings anyway. So I think there wasn't much pushback about that at all. I think that really similar to what Paul was saying, we offered that option about telephone calls as well if people did just feel that it was too much for them to take on, which was absolutely fine. But as I say, like most of the people we worked with were absolutely happy with going with the digital. And I think, as I said in my kind of most surprising moment, was the fact that how eager people were to really adopt the technology and look to challenge themselves and use different aspects for raising their hands during Teams and things like that, which were like huge steps forward. In terms of the sharing people's data, because it was purely with Blackwood, so none of the I guess we didn't have to look into that for the sessions that we had there, but certainly something that we've done some work with universities recently in terms of workshops. So obviously for ethics committees and things like that, it's really important that we keep separate databases for us, keeping the customers' details there and only sharing what's absolutely necessary with the other partners. So sorry, couldn't be any more help with that one, but it wasn't entirely relevant to how we were working in our workshops here.
Right, thank you very much, Ryan. And then a couple of other questions, which I think it would be really good to come to humanly on. Kind of, I guess, any advice or tips you've got on working with people who, where maybe English isn't their first language, or there's some kind of language barriers. And then there's also been another question about any tactics for working with deaf people. So I guess I know that obviously humanly do so much work in this area. And I know there's certainly some stuff you've done with people who don't have English as a first language. Would you like to share any suggestions on either of those points, Jenny or Zoe?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work with people whose English isn't their first language. So yeah, I mean, it's a great idea to translate materials. It depends on whether people have English as an additional language or they don't speak English at all. So yeah, you can get materials translated and then kind of translated back again for you to analyse and interpret. That works well. We've done that on a large scale project we're currently doing in Pakistan, and we're working with a team of Pakistani researchers who've been helping with that. We find that kind of making things as visual as possible and just using really simple plain English, short sentences, plain English instructions, and lots of kind of pictures and images and illustrations that kind of really demonstrate to people what we're asking them to do, kind of our techniques that work really well. In terms of working with deaf people, we have done work with deaf people face to face in the past using BSL interpreters. We haven't done anything remotely with deaf people. What we probably would do if we were kind of doing that within a project would be to have a deaf person on our team, or more than one deaf person on our team, to kind of help us co-create the best approach for engaging the deaf community. I think that's probably how we would go about it, or engage an organisation that has more specialism in that area, I would say. That would probably be a good approach.
Right, thank you, Jenny. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add any thoughts in relation to that question. No. Okay, a couple of questions it'd be good to kind of hear from the Trailblazers on. So one question is, are there any tips on how to compile and share a follow-up? You said we did with the people who engaged, kind of to let them know how they've been listened to and how you know, their feedback has contributed. And also, would either of you say that you found a particular maximum number of people that make a good session, or is it the more the merrier? Paul, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure. So I from our experience in terms of getting quality information, I wouldn't necessarily agree with kind of the more the merrier approach. Well, I think for us, probably most effective was sort of groups of 3 or 4 in terms of what getting feedback from everyone and offering everyone the chance to participate and equally to feel comfortable to participate. So yeah, I'd absolutely say 3 to 4 is probably the right sort of size for us. In terms of feeding back, we did ask participants when they signed up. We had them complete a brief survey monkey as part of a follow-up as well, and asked them if they'd be happy and be interested to know the findings of our consultations and our co-production, and then have gone back. And equally, that does have a double-edged sword because it's us trying to generate warm leads for stage 2 of the project as well for potential businesses we can engage then. So yeah, we did use a survey monkey for that, to then see who would be happy and who would be interested in hearing about what we'd found out.
Thanks, Paul. Ryan, if I can come to you on that.
Yeah, I was nodding away with Paul there because we done the exact same thing for both reasons. One, just to validate that everything that had been said and that had been put forward we'd taken on board and we're looking at moving forward within the project, but also just to make sure that they still feel part of the team. And we tried to make it that it was kind of engagement teams that we were working with in each of those neighbourhoods, so that they felt a pride and a passion attached to that, which is going to make it so much easier when we go into the project proper, which we're hoping makes a really big difference. And again, in terms of the maximum number of people, or the more the merrier, that was one of the big things that the big lessons we took from Professor Stephen Osborne, was that we can't just replicate the numbers that we'd be looking for in a face-to-face session. It needed to be something that was smaller, that was more manageable, and somewhere where people didn't just feel like a face in a sea of people, or we really wouldn't get the contributions that we were looking for. So I think we kind of on average about 6, up to maybe 9 or 10 at some times. But I think similar to what Paul said, that the best contributions we got is when the groups were smaller, and even certain things, the one-to-one sessions, especially stuff around isolation and loneliness, that seemed to come out more in the one-to-one discussions than it did in a group setting, which kind of makes sense in terms of how comfortable you are sharing that in front of other people. So yeah, definitely managing those numbers was huge. Great,
thank you, Ryan. There's a couple of questions here on, I guess, on a bit of a more practical point around digital engagement and overcoming some of the more practical barriers. Has any of the panel got any ideas around older people who do not have digital devices and how you can overcome that? So has anyone used any things like loan services or local partners discounting devices? And also on a practical note, are there any particular devices that people think are particularly user-friendly for older people? Because obviously people are using an array of different technology to do that. I don't know, Jenny, Zoe, if you've got any suggestions around that, either of those points?
Around the specific technologies, no, but with the people that we've been working with in the local councils do have schemes where they've been giving out either laptops or tablets to people aged over 50. In terms of the work that we've done with digital, of course, with the postal activities were a really good way of being able to still engage people in the research or co-creation phases remotely. And then when you're thinking about the diary logs, when we were sending out tasks, so we already had kind of planned tasks that we would send out to people via almost like a text message. Now it was up to the person on the other side whether they were more comfortable sending messages back or sending photos or sending videos. So it's allowing the flexibility of the individual, whether they've got a Nokia that still plays Snake or they've got a jazzy, whatever iPhone we're at the moment, allowing it to be kind of adaptable to different people's experience and technology levels. But then of course, having those non-digital methods as well.
And the other thing I would just quickly add is just touching base with people on what they're doing to keep in touch with their family and friends. Like, do they use WhatsApp, for example? Because if you want to do a video call with someone, it doesn't necessarily need to be Zoom. You could just do a FaceTime call with them or a WhatsApp call with them, you know, whatever they're kind of using in their day-to-day life that many people are and kind of have had to do, and just adapting to that.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Okay, just coming on to the next question, and this is again a very practical question, but it'd be great to hear all your experiences on this. I had a question here. Do you think it's beneficial to leave your camera on? Will it encourage participants to leave theirs on? I know that you talked a little bit about cameras, Ryan, so maybe come to you first. And I think it's when we spoke that I think there was an example that you shared with me about someone that you'd been working with who had been trying to do all their phone calls outside because they felt uncomfortable about having their house broadcast, which I thought was a really kind of interesting consideration. So definitely it's one of those things that's important people to have the option of, isn't it? I guess the use of cameras and knowing that they have that choice in the matter. Yeah, what do you think about keeping cameras on and rules around that?
Yeah, I think one of the big, I guess, the important points for me is making sure people know that during the recruitment phase, because I think there's an awful lot of people that hear Zoom and Teams and think that equates to them being seen in their home, and not everyone feels comfortable with that. So I think that's something that we share right at the start during the recruitment as well. But for me, I always try to have to have my camera on, more so for relationship building with people, because a lot of times you're working with people that you've never met face to face anyway. So, and I think if they feel comfortable and get a better idea of who you are, and then I think that always helps. But yeah, I would think in our session, I think we maybe had one out of all our sessions. I think we only had one person who didn't have their camera on, and that was due to a technical issue that our device wasn't modern enough to allow that to happen. The example you were saying there about the chap who we could only get on a nice day because he could only take part when he was outside in his garden because he just didn't feel comfortable enough inside. So I think it's definitely something to think about, but just making sure that we pass that message across that you've got the option one way or the other.
Right, thank you. Paul, do you want to kind of add anything on what you did around cameras?
No, I mean, we would generally always encourage people to, as part of that, trying to build a bit of that rapport. And it's very hard. When you're not in a room with people, you don't pick up those subtle signs, particularly obviously if they've got the camera off, of how they might react to something you ask or something that's said by someone else. So we did try and encourage people, but equally, as Ryan said there, we gave that option that if people didn't feel comfortable and didn't want their camera on, it was that idea of, stepping into their shoes. If they didn't feel comfortable to do that was perfectly acceptable as well. In that case, we would generally ask people to have the camera on for a second at the start, just to introduce themselves and say hello, just so everybody has, can see them. And then, if they prefer to turn it off, to then do it. So I think it's about offering that option. But generally, I would always have the preference if people do feel comfortable for them to have it on, because I just think it helps build a bit of that rapport that can be lacking at times in a digital sense.
Great, thank you. Kind of conscious of time, so I've just got final 2 questions that I'm going to open up to all of you for anybody who would like to answer. The first one is, do you have any tips on analysis of the qualitative information collected during engagement activities? I don't know, Jenny, obviously this is something that Humanly really specialise in. So I don't know if you've got any tips about analysing qualitative information that you might want to share.
Yeah, I mean, well, we really like to kind of focus on quotes and things people have said. And obviously, if we've got images that people have created, we'll kind of look at all of that as well. We find Miro, or alternatively Mural, invaluable. What we would do back in the day when we had an office is kind of stick everything up on walls, post-its, pictures, things like that. And then when you kind of see everything visually, for us, it helps us kind of identify patterns and themes. So once you kind of transfer information onto virtual post-its or real post-its, you can start moving them around, and you can color code them, so you can say, oh, someone said this, but someone else said this, and then you can start clustering them in terms of themes that are emerging, and that can help you kind of join the dots and see where the real opportunities are. But yeah, it's a very interesting process, great to do offline. It actually works really well online. I hate to say it possibly works better online, because everyone can dial in from anywhere and kind of see that virtual kind of board of all the quotes and all the images and everything, whereas if it's in the office, then you can't access it anytime, anywhere. So it is really, really good. It's really useful to use those types of tools.
Great, thank you. Paul or Ryan, did you want to share any tips on analysing qualitative information that you've collected?
You probably need our research and insight officers and universities that supported it with it rather than myself for that, to be honest with you.
No worries. Okay, so I'm going to come on to our final question, and just kind of end on, does anyone have any reflections on how they tried to ensure a diversity of perspectives in their co-creation work, and how successful they were in doing this? I mean, I'm sure there must be examples from some of the work that Humanly have touched on, but does anything spring to mind for either of the Trailblazers around diversity and perspectives?
I think for us, one of the things we wanted to make sure was that we got the perspectives, because we are Blackwood are a housing provider. We wanted to make sure we got perspectives from a mix of tenure types, so not just purely social renting tenants. We wanted to make sure that we had homeowners and private rented tenants as well that were part of the session, so that we're not just getting one viewpoint brought forward, which was something we were really keen to do.
Thank you, Brian. Paul, anything from you?
Yeah, I think this is something we've particularly identified for our stage 2 of the project. For stage 1, a lot of it was speaking to the actual decision, the business owners themselves, and we were trying to speak to various sectors within that. For stage 2, where we are keen to have expand our conversation with employees in particular, we are looking at a plan as to specific industries and making sure we hit different groups of people within the community, and the diverse community that we've got across Lancashire. So that is something we are very conscious of, and we are making an active plan for how do we make sure we do speak to a real range. And with our project, we're particularly keen that we target some of those SMEs in low income areas, so that it's not a project that increases potentially health inequalities by just targeting some of your more affluent businesses, so to speak.
Great, thank you. Well, unfortunately, we haven't got time for any more questions. Hope we've got through a lot of questions there. So thank you all for taking part, and really just, again, thank you again for all your contributions. to the thematic paper and all your insights today. So I'm going to hand back to Annette now just to wrap up proceedings for today.
Great, thank you, Veronica, and thank you everybody for your honest answers there during the Q&A session, and for you for asking great questions. I just want to take the final few minutes to wrap up this session. Firstly, feedback's really important to us when supporting the Healthy Aging Challenge community to ensure we're engaging with the right audience at these events, workshops, that we deliver what the community asks for. So we're just going to launch a quick Zoom poll on the webinar. There's just 3 quick questions, and really appreciate you filling those in for us while I just tie up. It's an anonymous poll, but really helps with that feedback. Thank you for that. So to find out more about the Healthy Aging Challenge community practice and join the extended community, then do visit our website that's been in the chat, and you can see what other events and engagement opportunities are going on that might be of interest for you. We will also email as a follow-up the links to our microsite, the thematic paper, the slides. There's going to be recording on our website, on the YouTube channel as well, so you can read back and watch back this, or share with other colleagues you think might be useful. So finally, I just want to thank all the speakers for today, to Jenny and Zoe from Humanly, to Ryan and Paul from the Trailblazer projects, to sharing their experiences, to Veronica for her excellent sharing for her session, and to the behind the scenes support that's always so key from Ellie and Louise from the team at Aging Better to support this webinar. And thank you to UKRI for their work in delivering the Healthy Aging Challenge and funding the community practice for us all to come together, learn and develop and create a healthier society to age well in. Finally, thank you all for joining today, and enjoy your sunny Friday afternoon. Thank you.